Welcome to Subramani. I'm going to talk about two types of funds which are very difficult for people to use. I'm not saying that these funds are bad, but it is very difficult for people to use them in their portfolios. One is the sectoral fund and one is the international fund. Suppose you decided 2 years ago to put money into maybe on an SIP basis into an European fund. You may not be making much money, right? And suppose you were putting for last somebody like me for last 7-8 years in US fund, you would have done extremely well. But the question is to know whether to put in Europe or in US, or you say I'll put half in Europe and half in US, your overall returns may not be too great. So question is, are sectoral funds good? Are international funds good? The answer is of course yes. But the question is, will you have the ability to pick the right sector or the right international fund is very difficult, because you don't know how to pick which one to invest in. So theoretically, these funds are good, but practically using them in your portfolio is extremely difficult. For example, if you see, and what makes it so difficult, and the answer is very simple. Suppose in the broader index, the weightage to real estate is say 5%, right? Now if you take all the sectoral funds, the real estate sector may be 18%. So what happens is, when you compare all the sectoral funds together, they lag the simple index fund. But the argument always is, but I will not invest in all the sector funds, which is completely right. You may be invested in BFSI, you may be invested in pharma, real estate, or infrastructure, right? So all these you could be in the right fund at the right time and make fantastic money. But at the end of a 3-year period or a 5-year period, when you got say 51% return, will you come out of that fund and go into the perfectly correct sectoral fund? The answer is it's very, very difficult, extremely difficult. And if you do it, if you have done it in the past, it could be sheer luck. Because 2-3 things can happen. Let us say the pharma sector has not performed well for the last say 2 years. Then that's a good time to be actually entering the pharma fund, because you know that one pharma will again have its own cycle, right? So you enter the pharma fund, and again for 6 months you find that it infrastructure fund which is doing very well and pharma fund is not doing anything. So you say you're tempted to now remove from pharma fund and get into infrastructure fund. I'm not saying whether it is a right move or a wrong move, and this has got nothing to do with timing. It is just that you got irritated with your pharma fund which is not performing and you wanted to move it into infrastructure, and that could exactly be the time when infrastructure will start coming down and pharma will go up. This is like while driving, the lane in which you are is always the slowest lane, or at least that's what you feel. You move from lane 1 to lane 2 and you find that lane 1 is now moving faster, right? So exactly like that. So you could make those moves and it could be completely wrong timing. So for example, say 6 months ago or 3 months ago, you went from the US market and put money in the China market. You may have done well. You may continue to do well because the Chinese market has been beaten down quite a bit. So maybe the Chinese market might outperform the US market over the next 2 years. You have no clue what will happen, right? So same whether it is an international fund or whether it is a sectoral fund. Assume again for a minute that you put money in BFSI and BFSI has not done well for last say 2 years. Last 2 years there's no great movement in the BFSI prices, so your BFSI fund is not doing well. But you put money in infrastructure fund and infrastructure fund is doing well. Now wait a minute, you put 20 lakhs in the BFSI fund and you put 5 lakhs in the infrastructure fund. So the next question which comes is, what is the weightage to give to each of those funds? Or should you just put money in a big large and mid cap fund and say, well, if it is infrastructure is the flavor of the month, my fund manager will pick infrastructure. If pharma is the flavor of the month, he will pick pharma. So let me not break my head into getting into sectoral bets. That is one way of looking at it and saying, okay, I will not worry about whether pharma will do well or BFSI will do well or infrastructure will do well. Or you take the hands-on approach and say, no, I will sit and monitor, and then you look at 4 infrastructure funds and you find that their portfolios are very different. So then you go and read the manifesto and you find that an infrastructure fund says banking is important infrastructure, so they should have banks. So it is loaded with lot of BFSI, and now BFSI is doing well, and because BFSI is doing well, your infrastructure fund does well. Now should you be in an infrastructure fund which has got an overload of BFSI, or should you go into a BFSI fund and say I will not be in the infrastructure fund? Or do you look at an infrastructure fund and say yes, of course banking is important, so it's okay if they have 20% in banking or 30% in banking. Now the question is, should a infrastructure sectoral fund have a concentrated 30% in BFSI? I don't know. These are questions which you have to answer. I don't have to answer as long as I am not picking up the fund in which to invest. Another very important thing that I have noticed is when a sector is not performing well, say real estate is not performing well, and your real estate fund is obviously not performing well for 2-3 years, that would be a great time to put a lump sum in a real estate fund. But wait a minute, what happens if it doesn't move for another 6 months? You will never get the timing perfect. You will always be in fact far ahead of the party time, right? So if 7 p.m. is the party, you may have reached at 4 p.m. Now the problem is not reaching at 4 p.m. The skill is sitting tight from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. because you want to leave at 9 p.m. and the real big drinkers would be drinking at 10 p.m. but you would have left at 9 p.m. because you said, okay, 2 hours in the party is good enough for me. Now the question is, when do you decide to exit a fund which is doing well? If you got 51% CAGR, should you exit, or should you wait for the CAGR to go down to 26%? Should you do an SIP in that fund going forward? For example, I think pharma fund is a mainstream fund. Now within pharma fund, you have pharma funds, you have pharma and allied services. For example, it has hospital services. So last about 2 years, the hospitals like Fortis and Apollo have done extremely well for their shareholders. So if you were in a pharma fund, you would have perhaps performed less than a company which is a pharma services, which includes pharma and hospital and testing, right? The path labs also in their portfolio. Then there are pharma funds which invest abroad. Maybe they invest only 20% abroad, but they do invest abroad. So picking which pharma fund, it's also now becoming a challenge. Should you be in the healthcare sector or should you be in the pharma fund? Right now, BFSI, I would today honestly believe that people should have BFSI in their portfolio as a BFSI fund, because to pick up all BFSI seems to be very difficult. Earlier it was only banking. Now you have banks, you have asset management companies, you have life insurance companies, you have general insurance companies. You will soon have, Bombay Stock Exchange is already listed. You will soon have National Stock Exchange listed, and you will have the father of them all, LIC. Now, if within all this, how will you create your own BFSI portfolio? So, should you invest in a BFSI portfolio? I think the answer is yes. I would rather invest in a BFSI fund rather than try to pick up each of those individually, picking up HDFC Bank or IDFC Bank or whatever, what have you, right? So, picking them all up will be very difficult, because HDFC Bank, it's a no-brainer. You keep buying and it is doing well. But well, it has done well for the last, 26-27 years. Doesn't mean that it will give you that kind of return. So you're looking for new. So should I be in City Union Bank? Should I be in IDFC? Should I be in UV Bank, Ujjivan Bank? Should I be in Equitas, right? Or should I be in Cholamandalam, Sundaram Finance? The answer is very difficult for you to give. And will asset management company make more money than a life insurance company? Will a life insurance company make more money than the general insurance company? The question is, none of these questions are easy to answer. So within all this, what has happened is, now one AMC has launched a fund which says, I will decide in which country to invest. And I think 3-4 AMCs have this fund. So I think that is a good fund. And they have launched one sectoral thematic fund which will decide in which sector to invest. So they may get out of pharma, they may get into infrastructure, get out of infrastructure, get into BFSI. They would do all that. I find the whole thing extremely tax efficient. I know I can do a 10-year SIP into these funds and let the fund manager take the call. However, it's your call to decide whether that fund manager will take a right call, right? So these are the difficulties of being in sectoral funds. Thank you.